thank you, Dr. Nowakowski. I appreciate the welcome that you've given me, and thank you everybody for coming out on this cold day. Although you're Minnesotans, you always come out on a cold day. I come from Chicago, so we're used to cold days, but it really makes Chicago seem like Florida these last couple of days. So anyway, but I really appreciate the warm welcome even in this rather chilly time. I'd like to share with you a story to begin. Once upon a time, a dog lay sleeping in the warm sun of a village square. All of a sudden, out of the corner of his half-opened eyes, he spied a rabbit darting across the road. He took off immediately in hot pursuit, and he ran up and down the streets and through the countryside, keeping up the chase day and night, never seeming to tire. Eventually, other dogs saw him and joined in the run. But one by one, they grew tired and stopped running. Why? Well, the storyteller says they were running only because they had seen the first dog do so. They had never caught sight of the rabbit in the first place. The one who has never glimpsed the vision grows easily tired of running. They give up the chase because they cannot remember why they had begun to run in the first place. So what we're talking about basically is how is St. Mary's a Lasallian Catholic university, and it's totally related to what the vision and the mission is of this wonderful university. I'm just going to add before I begin. I think what you do here, the fact that you provide adults with the opportunity to complete bachelor's degrees, receive master's degrees and doctorate degrees, is one of the most moving things that I can think of. I think a graduation back on the Winona campus, when we see the young 22-year-olds getting their, it's really great. Their parents are there and their family and they're cheering for them. But it's really moving to see mothers, fathers, grandmothers sometimes, vets going up on that stage and getting their degree, giving them a chance for a better life, a more productive life, and a real sense of personal accomplishment. That is something you give. And it's really totally in the connection with the LaSallian ministry. And so I just want you to know that from the bottom of my heart, I really appreciate the work that you do here in this particular location. Not to diminish the young people who need the formation in the beginning. They need it. But what you are giving the people here is another chance and a real sense of accomplishment in their lives after lots of experience in their lives. Sometimes difficult experiences, sometimes good experiences. So thank you. And I think if you don't remember anything else from what I say, I hope you remember these words. But we want to take a look a little bit at our mission, and I think what you're doing is fulfilling this mission, as in the story here, the dog chasing the rabbit. Our mission is, enriched by the Lasallian Catholic heritage, St. Mary's University of Minnesota awakens, nourishes, and empowers learners to ethical lives of service and leadership. That is what we are doing here. And we're doing it through our Catholic Lasallian tradition, and we're doing it so that people can live lives of service, change the world around them, and that they can also have the opportunity and the chance to develop their leadership skills that they may already have. So to begin with, I think we'd better be clear about the meaning of that somewhat elusive word, Lasallian. I'm going to quote right now Brother Luke Somm, a theologian, a great Lasallian scholar, a writer of many books, especially books on Lasallian topics. He says, "It is unfortunate that sometimes the word Lasallian is stretched to mean almost anything. That term means sense only if it derives and refers to the 17th century priest whose name is John Baptist de La Salle, founder of the Brothers of the Christian Schools. De La Salle was a man of vision, not that he had visions, but that he could see clearly the world in which he lived. It's been said that oftentimes founders of movements, founders of religious orders, they were not people, they were not men and women of the future. They were men and women of the present that read the needs of the present time, and that's why they were visionaries." So Brother Luke goes on and says he was able to find creative and practical solutions to the present problems of his day. I find that John Baptist de La Salle had an amazing sense of practicality and creativity. And oftentimes we don't find those two things together. Sometimes we have practical people and creative people. And he was able to blend both of those things so effectively and so well. A couple of things about what he did. He was kind of a reluctant founder of the Brothers. He didn't start out to found the Brothers of the Christian Schools. But around 1680, he found himself helping a man who was trying to start schools for the poor boys. And that he came to Reims, this man Adrian Miel, and wanted to found a couple of schools to help the poor kids in the street. Many of the children, the boys especially, were loose in the streets, having no education, having no prospects for the future, and their parents were either so overworked or were just ignoring their own children. So de La Salle said he'd help. And so this part of his life was boundary breaking, and he kept breaking boundaries for the rest of his life. He had a position in the church called a canon. We won't explain it too much, but it was a good position. And he was also from a wealthy family. But he gave that up eventually. He changed his spirituality. He broke out of the spirituality he had to look at the world in a new way. He moved beyond his comfort, and he moved beyond what he knew. He also moved geographically from Reims. So I think that that's an important thing to understand, that this man who invented this, what he accomplished. So he gathered around himself some teachers for these schools and found out that they weren't qualified to teach. Not that they didn't have degrees, they just didn't have the education to do it, the wherewithal. So he brought them into his house, and little by little they started calling themselves the Society of the Christian Schools. And when we say Christian in France at that time, in the 17th century, it primarily meant Catholic. That France was Catholic, and the word Christian and Catholic would have been synonymous, rather than a wider view today that would include Protestant churches and so forth, Orthodox churches. So eventually they started to think of themselves as brothers to each other, and the time came they said, well, we should begin a religious order. And they called themselves the Brothers of the Christian Schools, and that's what we brothers call ourselves officially today. Sometimes we're called Christian Brothers or de La Salle Brothers, but our official title is Christian Brothers. He did not begin any universities. Universities for us is a relatively new development from about the 19th century. We can go back, if some scholars say, well, we want to find something in de La Salle about a university. He did have for a while teacher training programs for teachers that were going to go out to the rural areas of France. We were primarily in towns and in cities, so more urban. And so he did do that. So if you want to find a beginning of de La Salle of universities in de La Salle, probably that would be it. But universities really began in the 1800s, mid-1800s. Perhaps Manhattan College in New York was the first LaSallian university, although in France, about the same time, the La Salle in Beauvais, it's a technical and agricultural university, college in France. And so they kind of vie for who's first, and there's little arguments about that. The arguments aren't that important, but that's when it all started. So John Baptist de La Salle founded gratuitous or free schools. The schools were free. And if you're a student here, you might say, what happened to that? But the idea at the time that was these kids and their parents, they could not pay to go, so he offered free schools. And he tried to keep it that way and relied upon the donations of others. And so that may be the beginning of advancement and development work too, I don't know. But he felt that that's what they really needed at the time, and he was able to do that with the help of others. His schools were designed to provide what he called a human and Christian education. And by that he means that he had to form the young men with Christian beliefs, for their own sake, the sake of their families, for the sake of their souls. It was salvific. It was for their salvation. But that wasn't enough, as good as it was, because he felt there was a great need that they have a real education with valuable skills, that they would be able to live, to have families of their own and support their families. And so that began the purpose of why our schools are both human and Christian education, and why the LaSallian schools oftentimes have a very practical bent in our curriculum. Very practical sense. As you see here, those of you that are teaching here and taking classes here, you see a great emphasis on skills, on professions, and that was a real change in how education was seen at that time. So, what does St. Mary's say? How does this play out for St. Mary's? St. Mary's has developed LaSallian core principles. When I say developed, is you might find another LaSallian university or school have a list of principles that could be the same basic ideas but differently expressed, because John Baptist de La Salle did not really write a list like this. He never called them LaSallian schools, he called them Christian schools, but in a couple of things that he has written, the meditations for the time of retreat, meditations for the brothers on their work as teachers, and the conduct of schools or management of schools, we can glean out of that these elements. Okay, and so quickly we'll go through. First of all, is respect for all persons. We honor the dignity and respect all individuals. John Baptist de La Salle emphasized respect for each other and for the students in meeting them where they are. One of his lines in his meditations is, go up to God in prayer so you can come down to your students. Meet the students where they are. Respect them, respect who they are. And he emphasized that in the day-to-day management of the schools. Quality education. We engage together in quality education as students, staff, and faculty by thinking critically and examining our world in the light of faith and reason. Notice here, we engage together. Notice the community aspect of that. The professors and the teachers and the staff engaged together the whole process of education, thinking critically, and examining the world that it is today. It's something we all do together, and that was an important key element, is community as part of the LaSallian method. Secondly, because he was meeting students where they were, he taught in French. You might say, no big surprise, but at the time, schools at that time were supposed to teach in Latin. That was not the language people spoke. He said, we're not going to do Latin, we're going to do French, and he wrote books of grammar in French and ways to teach the students. Thirdly, inclusive community. We celebrate unity and diversity and welcome all members of the community. It's part of being inclusive, and we welcome all into the school. So I'll give you an example of this in real life, that was real life, but real life today, or relatively recently. We have a school in Bucaramanga, Colombia, and that was during the Colombian Civil War from about 10, 15 years ago. And some of the guerrilla leaders who had kind of controlled that area at the time asked for their children, some of their children, to come to the brothers' school in Bucaramanga. The brothers had a big discussion among themselves of whether they would accept kids of the guerrilla leaders. They finally decided to do so. Why? Because they were children who needed an education, and that would be true to de La Salle's concept. Children who needed an education, regardless of who the parents were, what the parents did. It was not a family judgment, but it was in fact to accept children as they are. So it gives you a real life example when we're talking about inclusive community. It's to accept everyone in. And we'll talk a little bit later, if we have time, about it's not just for Catholics, obviously. Everybody is welcome into the school. Concern for the poor and social justice. We are in solidarity with the marginalized and advocate for those suffering from injustices. It's why we teach some of the courses that we teach here, why we have some of the degree programs that we have here. It's why, probably more in the Winona campus than here, there are immersion trips for students to understand what is happening in different parts of the world, what is happening with poverty, with border issues, and for them to reflect on it and think critically about those situations. That's key to this entire thing. I will say one thing. Probably in 17th century France, not just probably, but I'll tell you, in 17th century France, words like inclusive and social justice probably weren't used. We use those words today to explain. But I think the philosophy of John Baptist de La Salle would certainly be inclusive and pro-social justice. But in the time of Louis XIV, at the Sun King, kings and the government were seeing divine right, and it was a whole different kind of society at that particular time. So those words probably you wouldn't find them in de La Salle's actual writings. We gleaned that from them. And finally, faith in the presence of God, very essential. We begin, as Brother Robert began, with our prayer, let us remember we're in the presence of God, because we believe that God is present with us all the time, and that God is present in our students. I heard a great line that said to me one time, maybe as LaSallian teachers and leaders, we should pray sometimes, let us remember that we are the presence of God. Because sometimes with our students and with the people we meet on any given day, we might be the only presence, the only divine presence that someone may experience. It's a great responsibility. In fact, it's really probably easier to say, let us remember we're in the presence of God, than let me remember that I am the presence of God. It's a lot more scary to do. So I think that why this is very important, and that goes through all of the writings and the works of John Baptist de La Salle, this idea. So all of this to understand what it is to be LaSallian Catholic is this is a way for us of being Catholic. But it can also be a way of being a professor, of being a staff member, and being a student. And what this is, part of this, is charism. The word charism is kind of a theological word. It's related to charismatic. You know that some sports figures are charismatic. Some movie stars are charismatic. Some politicians are charismatic. People you meet are charismatic. This is similar, but it isn't for oneself. Charism is a gift from God for others, that we're given a gift from God for others. Now, some people find these a little bit. Charism is a gift of God, it's for others. For example, it's the grace of preaching, of prophecy, healing are charisms. Teaching is a charism. It's a gift. It's a gift that we have. It's a gift we've been given. The LaSallian charism is our charism in the church is to make the loving and saving presence of Jesus Christ a visible and effective reality in the world of education, in the world of the young. So we feel that our LaSallian charism is to make the gospel present in the world of education. That's what this is. That's what this is about. That's what it's for. And it's related to the notion of vocation. I'm going to talk about it for a second or two. And it's not just limited to a vocation to be a brother, a priest, a sister, a deacon, something like that. It's a call. And Parker Palmer, who some of you may have read, he does some educational writing. He's a great speaker and writer. He says, vocation at its deepest level is this. Be careful, you English teachers. This is something that I cannot not do. See the double negative? Ignore it. This is something that I cannot not do for reasons I am unable to explain to anyone else and don't fully understand myself, but are nonetheless compelling. Palmer says this is what a vocation is. It's his definition, and we can't fully explain it ourselves, to ourselves or to anyone else. Why would you, who are in the educational process, do this when you know you could probably make more money doing something else? Why would those of you studying, if you're studying social work, you're studying other areas that are service to other people, why are you doing that? It's the same reason why artists have to paint and sculptors have to sculpt and actors have to act. It's the same thing. It is because it's something I can't fully explain even to anyone else or myself, but it's a call that I feel. I feel I have to do this. When I was a young teacher in high school, sometimes the very first couple of years, a kid would raise his hand and would say, "Brother, why did you become a brother?" Of course, what he really wanted was to get distracted from the class I was teaching. We could go off on some tangent. And I sometimes would say, you know what, I had the brothers in high school, and they were really great with us. They were good teachers. They joked with us in the corridor. They'd play basketball with us after school. They were really great. But I knew I didn't like what I said because it wasn't really the real answer until I realized the question I should have been answering, or the answer I should have given was, I can't be Tom Johnson unless I'm a brother. It's who I am. It's a vocation. And I think that's true with a lot of the things we do that are of service to other people. It's a call, and it's somewhat mysterious. And it's related to spirituality. And spirituality, there's a Spanish theologian, Juan Antonio Marcos, and he wrote, spirituality is something real as the wind. We feel wind today. We know what that's like out there today. But he says sometimes it envelops you, but sometimes you don't realize it's out there. But for a rare moment you realize its presence, and spirituality is something like that. It's something hard to grab a hold of. One definition of spirituality, I just missed that. One definition of spirituality has to do with the attitudes and beliefs of a person's mind which cause each of us to live out our worldview in the context of relationship with God, with other human beings, and with creation. Spirituality transcends all areas of one's being and brings meaning and purpose to life. It's from Craig Kennett, and it is Kennett, no H. Kenneth Miller, in Baby Boomer Spirituality. This was before OK Boomer became a big expression. But nevertheless, I think this really is, it's something that envelops us completely. And so charism is related to the idea of spirituality, and Lassallean spirituality, uniquely in this Lassallean world, has education in a variety of forms as its setting, and the teacher or educator as its low focus, and the salvific potential of education as its inspiration. It is a spirituality for educators. It is really a spirituality focused on educators. When I was in Sri Lanka, visiting in Sri Lanka, I was meeting with a group of novices. These are young men studying to be brothers. One of them asked me, "Brother, how come in our parish we have Ignatian retreats and we have Franciscan retreats, we don't have Lassallean retreats?" I said, because Lassallean spirituality is focused on education. We say focused on the teacher, but by teacher I mean everybody in the whole broad sense, in the whole entire enterprise, whether you're a counselor or a staff member or the school secretary or whatever you are. It is for all educators. That's what it's about. It's a spirituality that helps us focus on the particular role that we've been given, and we think it's been given like a vocation. And so Lassallean spirituality talks about faith and zeal, that it takes faith, we'll talk a little bit about faith in a few minutes, and zeal, that enthusiasm, that effortless kind of work, full of effort, I should say, full effort kind of work that keeps you going all the time to accomplish what you have to accomplish. That is faith and zeal. The presence of God, we mentioned. Students as disciples. I never liked that term. It took me a long time to realize that. I used to change, when the founder would write about take care of your disciples, he's talking about the students, I'd change it to students, because I'd say, well, you know, we've got to use a more modern word there. Until it really came, in reading some of his works, it came really to me that the students are our disciples because we're sharing something of ourselves and our lives with them. It's more than just information that we give when we're educating. It's more than just information that we give. We share of ourselves, our beliefs, and our life. And so hence students are disciples. Care and concern for the marginalized. It has always been a focus that we are very conscious of the poor, how we can best serve the poor, how we can train people, which it goes on here, to serve people that are marginalized in some way in their lives, is what we're working for and trying to do. Trust in the providence of God. We believe that God will see us through. John Baptist de La Salle gave away all of his money and all of his fortune because the brothers challenged him. Don't talk to us about the providence of God when you're a wealthy man and you have that big house. So he gave it all away. And darn it, he didn't endow the schools. I was thinking, why didn't he endow the schools? But he said, if we trust that this is God's work, God will take care of us. And so in many ways, we rely on the providence of God. We start schools not knowing all the time how it's all going to turn out. We just started a program in Lebanon for Syrian refugees. No idea how we're going to finance the thing and support it, but it's going on now for 4 years. Providence of God. It's what we should be doing. And forming, lastly, an educational faith community. We try as much as we can to have an educational community in the work that we do. Okay, being Lasallian, Catholic, and being inclusive. We'll spend a couple of minutes here just talking about some of the faith elements that affect us today and some questions we might have about this. Obviously, in the 19th and 20th centuries, there's been a great drastic change in society and also in the Catholic Church. Vatican II is an example that confirms some of that change. Vatican II talked about, among other things, that everyone in the church has a vocation. Everyone in the church is part of the mission of the church and is missionary in a certain respect, not only religious and priests and sisters and deacons. Also, one of the changes that we've experienced is religious diversity of our students and staff, and therefore sometimes uncertainty about the role and place of faith and belief, even in Lasallian University today. Are we Catholic, and in what way? Or are we Catholic or Lasallian? What would that mean? Are we Lasallian Catholic? The mission statement, we've seen it already, answers that in a certain respect. It's a wonderful mission statement. It's so succinct and so clear, telling us what we do. We know mission statements are created by committees, and sometimes they would go on slide after slide after slide, trying to encompass all kinds of things. This is it. This is what it is that we are, and it's clear. And so I really think however it came about, it's a very good mission statement, I think, because it emphasizes the nurturing of ethical lives of service and leadership in a Lasallian Catholic heritage. But I would add that it's a living heritage, and it informs and responds to the times that we're living in. I'll give you some examples, and you can probably give me examples from your life here too. I have met Hindus, Jews, Muslims, and Buddhists who call themselves Lasallian because they take elements of the holistic Lasallian education, the notion of touching hearts and being student-centered, prizing correction over punishment, and applying it to themselves as teachers. While Lasallian education is always based in Catholic teaching and belief, elements of it apply to people who are not Christian, and for that reason, people of many faiths and all faiths or no faiths can sometimes call themselves Lasallian. Hence we talk about a Lasallian vocation, not only brothers, but those who feel called to this charism in some mysterious way. And we view all of those who are involved in this enterprise, if we call it that, in some kind of association for an entire career or maybe just for a while. But community relationship is the key. That is the key to this whole thing. So is there a standard of being Lasallian? Well, that's a tough question. Some people have asked this. De La Salle founded the Brothers of the religious community in the church. His writings were to the brothers, although adapted by many, many, many other people in this educational enterprise. For example, the Lasallian term association is most completely understood as the vow that the brothers take. Yet the idea, the concept of forming a larger educational community and individual commitment to it in varying degrees can be called the spirit of association. It's more than working together, but being committed. It's also being committed to the larger goals of the Lasallian mission incarnated in a very particular place. And so every Lasallian school, we're not like McDonald's, we're not franchises, McDonald's or Culver's or something like that. We actually are unique. So St. Mary's is a unique, particular way of living out this Lasallian charism. Lewis University in Romeoville, Illinois is a unique way of carrying out this particular charism. So we don't judge if someone is more Lassallean than another. Judgment has no value in this and would tear us apart. So a Buddhist who lives some of the characteristics of the Lassallean education philosophy might call his or herself Lassallean. Could anyone object? No, absolutely not. The reality is that a minority of Catholics, something about the Catholics to think about, those that are Catholics, a minority of Catholics are actually practicing their faith today, as defined by church attendance. Scandals, and we know there's been scandals, failure to nourish people spiritually, the lack of credibility are part of the problem. Some of this is really in society itself, how society has changed in these last years. But the young people who participated in the Youth Synod called by Pope Francis in 2018 begged church workers to be honest versions of themselves. They said, the young people, a credible church is one which is not afraid to allow itself to be seen as vulnerable. Indeed, the church is seen as vulnerable today and has been through history. The church is a very human organization because we're all human. But we cannot forget the service it gives. Brother Robert worked on the West Bank at Bethlehem University, and a friend of mine who works at the university, I've known for a long time, once told me, he's Greek Orthodox, he's not Catholic, but he said the Latin Church, which means Roman Catholic Church. Roman Catholic Church is the one that provides us a school, a university, a hospital, health services, community development, jobs programs. They're doing all that. So despite the difficulties that the church has had, many, many services are provided for the church, by the church, and have been for many, many years, and the Lassallean world is part of that. I'm coming down near the end because I said I would allow some time for questions, but I'm going to say a couple of things just about this Catholic thing and then finish up. Bethlehem University, for example, where I mentioned Brother Robert worked there, is about 70% Muslim, but it's Catholic. It's known as a Catholic university. It follows, it has completely all the Lassallean ideals and Catholic ideals. Probably he could explain it a little bit better than I could. Christian Brothers University, a sister university of ours in Memphis, Tennessee, is about 1/3 Catholic. But it is Catholic. I was a participant in what's called the busy person retreats, where a student agrees to be followed in spiritual direction for a week. It was a kind of a retreat. There are some readings. I had 4 students I was given. One of them was Catholic, 3 were not. We share this whole thing. And that's part of this Lassallean vision. In Pakistan and in Thailand, we have schools that are over 90% either Buddhist or Muslim. In Pakistan, when there's Mass sometimes for the Catholic students, but when there's a common prayer service, there are readings from the Quran and readings from the Bible. So this is what happens. This is what it is about. And so we cannot say that we don't share these things, and we do share them. We're all inclusive, and we share them in a very real way in all the places that we are. I'm going to finish up with a story that I told about 20 years ago. And this is about this graduate program here in Minneapolis. And it came from Roxanne Eubank. We know that she's been ill lately. And it's a story about a man who was one of 11 children raised by his grandparents in the inner city of Chicago. He graduated from high school and college before coming to St. Mary's here. In a short time, the teachers at St. Mary's realized, while he was verbally very articulate, his writing was terrible. One faculty member, Mike Sager at the time, I don't know if he's still here or what, volunteered to work with him. He assessed that this young man's reading and writing were at second grade level. Mike procured grade school workbooks and coached him through each and every assignment. Meeting on Saturdays, often for 10 consecutive hours. Roxanne continued, "Today I had the honor of being a reader on his summary paper. While it isn't perfect, it's graduate level, an incredible testament to what can happen when you people bring together when you bring together people who care about learning and care about others. Incidentally, his paper was a proposal to develop mentoring programs for African American male children to prevent them from falling through the cracks in the public education system. Thank you.